Go ahead.
All right, so hello, this is the sales management simulation presentation for Group 8, Business as Usual. I'm Alexandra, and we have Bridget, Gannon, and Jessica here to talk about how our simulation went. Next slide. So I have a brief slide on the role of sales managers in this simulation. So in brief, in this simulation, the role of the sales managers is to take the ideas and strategies that each member has and simplify them until a basic sales plan is formulated. The importance of this is that each team member may or may not agree with the ideas of other team members, but the most important decision our team made was to break down each of our ideas to their foundation and formulate a few key strategies we could all agree on from the beginning. This became the decision that preceded the actual first decision. So the decision before decision one. As a group, we determined our core strategies for the duration of the simulation. We based the future tactics around these core strategies. We wanted to keep our employees happy, to pay them well, offer competitive commissions, run contests, and place them in or near their hometowns and retrain instead of fire. We wanted to focus on the product that would bring the most revenue in the end, product B. And we wanted to maintain reasonable prices. We did not want to implement penetration pricing, but we wanted to have reasonable prices in the top 75%. We ended up agreeing on a high-end / premium pricing strategy. And then if you could open the, yes. And we'll start at the overview, if you don't mind, or the financial statement.
And I can, Okay.
Okay.
You will read it?
So, yeah, basically this financial statement is what we referenced back to while we were doing the simulation and filled in as we were going. This was particularly important because watching our assets and our expenses was one of the main goals that we had while going through this, and was one of the reasons ultimately that we were able to come up out of the negative. So this is kind of just a financial statement sheet. It follows the flow of the results. And now we can start at quarter one with Jess.
Okay, thanks, Pat. So as Ali previously mentioned, we wanted to use a strategy of basically keeping our employees happy. Initially, we really wanted to just try to get a full sales team. So we started off by offering 5 candidates decent salaries of roughly $5,000 over their expected salary, just because we wanted to cover as much ground as possible. And for our current sales team, we wanted to see if our salespeople would perform better in their hometown regions. So what we did was we relocated Tiffany and Carly to their hometown region, which was Region 10. And for our compensation for our employees, we started off with a pretty decent commission of 1.75% and with the contest of $4,000 to basically just incentivize our team to start making sales. And with our initial strategy, we decided to mark up the price for Unit A and B. We initially started off with $3,900 for Unit A and $5,700 for Unit B. And because of the stagnant market, we wanted to focus more on our cheaper product, which was Unit A. So we put the emphasis at 60% with an emphasis on Unit B at 40%. And we also purchased more of Unit A during this quarter because of that. With our market research, we wanted to get a good idea of what we were competing against. So we started off by buying a lot. We basically bought 7 market research. And later on, you'll see that we start narrowing it down to the market research that helped us the most to decrease those expenses. And with our results for quarter one, all 5 of the candidates accepted our offers, which gave us the advantage of just having a larger team compared to our competition. Carly and Tiffany actually ended up performing the same in Region 10. So what we did was we basically moved Carly in the next quarter. You'll see in the data that Caroline also performed the worst with a total of only 16 units. So in the next quarter, we also decide to retrain her. Overall, in this quarter, we felt our team performed well with our compensation, because if you look at the regional market share, you'll just see that we had the most for Unit A compared to our competition. We did lack in Unit B, but later on we did start emphasizing more on that. We found that our Unit A was actually priced extremely high compared to our competition based off of the competitive unit pricing. So for the next quarter, we decided to adjust it. And then with the 5 new recruits and the $30,000 we spent in market share, we lost a lot of money. And we ended up in roughly negative 700,000 for profit. But we were confident that with our larger sales team, we would quickly be able to make up for the loss. So now for quarter 2, if you don't mind moving on to the quarter 2 worksheet. All right, thanks, Pat. So because of the performance of Carly and Tiffany being the same, we relocated Carly to an empty region, which was Region 8. As I previously mentioned, we decided to retrain Caroline because of her poor performance in quarter 1. And as far as our compensation with our employees, we stayed consistent, leaving the commission and the competition the exact same. With our recruitment, we made 3 offers to the strongest candidates based off of their performance in their interviews. We wanted to decrease our expenses, so we offered a lower salary for all 3. Our idea at the time was that if we just started off with a salary closer to their expected one, then we could probably just raise the salary later on. And with our production and sales, we adjusted our unit price for A to match the competition. So we decreased it from $3,900 to $3,600. And based off of the regional forecast, we wanted to start focusing more on Unit B. So we adjusted the emphasis for Unit A and B on this quarter, 50-50. And we also purchased less market research, decreasing that expense from $30,000 to $10,000. And we narrowed it down to only 3 based off of what we found most useful from the previous quarter. When deciding how much inventory to purchase, we used the industry sales forecast, but we did forget to divide it by 4. So you'll see here that we bought a lot more units than we needed, and we lost almost $30,000 because of that. Obviously, we learned from this, and you'll see in the next few quarters that we purchased way less inventory, and we eventually make profit. But as a result of the decisions that we made in quarter 2, we did get rejected from the 3 offers that we made. So we learned to start, making a more competitive salary. And then, of course, Caroline was placed into training. And despite being rejected by those candidates, we still had a pretty strong sales team as far as covering as many regions as we could. And our team actually performed very well. We actually had more than double in sales since quarter 1. So our strategy did help us, but we did lose the $30,000 in inventory. But as I mentioned earlier, the market research decreased from $30,000 to $10,000. And if you look at the overview sheet, you'll see that despite the error, our profit went from negative $700,000 to negative $292,000. So we improved a lot in quarter 2.
Okay.
Moving on to quarter 3, if you don't mind, pulling up the worksheet. Thanks. So quarter 3, some of the decisions we made were pretty straightforward. Again, we kept compensation the exact same with the competition and the commission of 1.75. We did decide to retrain 2 of the lowest performers, which was Ema and Sarah. And then with recruitment, we made offers to 2 of the strongest candidates, again, based off of their interviews, with about $5,000 over their expected salary. At this point in time, our forecast was starting to show an increase in Unit B. So we put more emphasis on Unit B at 60%, and then for Unit A at 40%. And for market research, we were trying to just narrow it down to the 2 most helpful market research based off of the previous quarter. So we did that to also decrease our expenses. And for the results of Q3, you'll see that neither of the candidates accepted our offer. However, our sales team did make about $100,000 more than the last quarter. So our strategy was still working pretty well. Our inventory charges were the same and our cost of training doubled, but you'll see in the next quarter that we bounced back pretty quickly from this loss. And that's Q3.
So moving on with Q4, if we could just quickly take a look at the overview sheet.
Let me set this up first and I'll come back to it. Just
Okay. So just to point out a few things on the overview sheet between Q3 and Q4, we can see a minor decrease in our gross margin due to a significant drop in Model A sales. This quarter, we did manage our inventory more efficiently by decreasing our inventory charges about $8,000, but we did end up spending more for our commission increase and on transferring the salespeople to different territories. So this quarter, we unfortunately did do more damage and ended up increasing our deficit by about $25,000, leaving us in debt over $328,000. But these decisions will soon pay off in the results for Q5. So this quarter, we continued our strategy of sending the lowest performers for training. If we could quickly take a look at the salespeople worksheet, you would be surprised to see that one of our highest rating salespeople, Henry Schneider, with a rating of 4.6 repeating, he ended up being second to last in sales for Q3. Also, Caroline Aiken, if we take a look at her rating, she ends up being our worst ranked salesperson throughout the simulation. She is also sent for training in Q4. And just to point out, this is her second time being sent for training, as she was sent previously in Q2 after significantly underperforming compared to the sales team in Q1. So now we could take a look at the Q4 worksheet, if you don't mind. We can also see returning from training, we have Ema Cyclone and Sarah Barr. Upon their return, they were both in the bottom in Q2, and they go away for training Q3 and come back Q4 with a 50% increase in their total sales. So we decided that training was a pretty effective tool in this situation. You can also see that we bumped our commission rate up from Q3's 1.5% to a 1.75%. According to our market research, we were among the lowest commission set at 4%, but we decided to maintain this low rate until we create a profit. We also increased our Unit A price by $100 because we were the lowest price compared to the competition, according again to research, but we left Product B pricing just as is to remain in the median compared to the competition. So we also noticed that for the sales forecast for Product B, the forecast increased significantly between the time we last ordered the research to now, and that Product A slightly decreased. So we inferred this change would be caused by competing firms emphasizing Product B. So we decided to boost our Product B emphasis up to 80% from the previous half and half structure. We decided our team was so strong we could probably compete with the firms, and we didn't want to let them just take over the Product B sales. So we decided to frame our future strategy from this point as if the market was never going to change from a stagnant market, because because of that, we concluded we had a pretty solid sized team and decided to pause hiring at this point just to save money and try to reach that profit. And we also decided to only train our bottom salesperson as opposed to the 2 bottom, just to save cash again. During this time, we also discussed the possibility of having to fire our lowest yielding team members if we didn't reach this profit soon. So we decided our focus for the upcoming quarters would be reduce the spending, reduce like our ordering market research, and only buying more of product A or product B if necessary, since we overloaded for the last 3 quarters. Our mindset was that if our people were better trained, that we would end up outselling and therefore boosting our company's competitive position. So moving on to quarter 5, let's take a look at the overview really quick.
Secondly, do one thing at a time.
Thanks.
Okay.
So in quarter 5, we can see the effect of our last quarter decisions. We can see we did finally make the profit, and it finally paid off. We ended up making a profit of $93,334. Taking a closer look, you can see our gross margin nearly doubled. While sales for product A did decrease, Model B's, our emphasis on Model B really paid off because the gross margin increased significantly by almost $400,000, leaving us with a gross margin of $825,000. So in our operating expenses, you can see this time we were able to spend less on our inventory charges from ordering less, and our training expenses were also decreased because we were only training 1 at a time. However, we did spend slightly more on commissions because you see we raised the rate again to further motivate our sales team. We spent more on transfer expenses because we continued trying salespeople in different regions, trying to move some back to their hometowns to see if it would produce more productivity. Altogether, we were able to decrease our costs by around $40,000, leading to our huge jump from $328,000 in the hole to a surplus of $93,000. So if we could take a look at the quarter 5 sheet. Thank you. You could see that we did completely sell out of Model B while only selling a fraction of Model A units. So we were satisfied with our decision to focus more effort on Model B. We do have Henry Schneider and Caroline Aiken returning back from training. Schneider experienced a 64% increase in sales, while Aiken a 40% increase. Aiken in this situation is our lowest rating, so she was not performing well, but you could see that Henry really benefited from the training. We decided to move John Appleton, who ended up being a steady salesman throughout the simulation, to region 9 because we had no one in that region. And for this quarter, we decided to send Sophia Alvarez, because while she wasn't the bottom performer, she was in the bottom 3, and she had never been trained before. You can also see we bumped our commission up from 1.75 to 2%, again, to continue motivating our salespeople. And we decided to maintain the commission or the pricing strategy and an 80% emphasis because those choices did so well for us for this quarter. And now I'll hand it over for quarter 6.
So for quarter 6, at this point, we had already made a profit and we were doing very well. And we ended up deciding to maintain our sales team and not move them from any location, or decided not to train them. Instead, we decided to raise our commission by 0.5% here to help ultimately drive the sales, and decided to keep the sales contest at $4,000. For recruitment, we tried to hire 2 new salespeople with the goal of ultimately replacing Sarah Barr because her rating was so low. And we offered them both $5,000 above their expected salary. For production, we decided to stay with our strategy from quarter 5 due to the fact that we only made a profit in last quarter. So we kept the 80% Model B emphasis, 20% internal selling, and kept the prices the same for both Model A and Model B. Due to this, we almost doubled our gross margin on sales. And with the compensation, we kept most of our employees happy and increased the overall sales substantially this quarter. Although Henry Schneider did have a complaint about low income, which we later on address in the following quarter, in quarter 7. And recruitment, both of our recruits that we tried to hire declined our job offer, so we were not able to proceed with Sarah Barr and terminating her. And our production and sales, we did overestimate how much of Model A we needed and underestimated Model B. ultimately we had to pay $6,805 of inventory charges and $9,520 of production overtime. But even with this, we were able to have a profit of $923,000 essentially. So if you could go on to quarter seven, that'd be great. Now for this quarter seven, we did grow substantially from last quarter. So then again, we decided not to train any of our employees, move them to different locations. And for compensation, we ended up rising both the commission and the contest price. We raised commission by 0.5% and the contest up to $6,000. And along with that, we took into account Henry's complaint about commission. So we increased the pay for high performers on our sales team, including Henry, who had complained. For recruitments, we again offered 2 new people jobs. And in this case, in case I'm a clone quits because she had a personal complaint last quarter, or if we ended up needing to fire Sarah Barr again. So instead of doing the $5,000 above expected salary like last quarter, we ended up doing $8,000 above their expected salary this quarter in hopes of being able to recruit them and have them come onto our sales team. For production and sales, we wanted to put more of an emphasis on Model B, so we ended up buying smaller amounts of Model A and we made 70 units of Model A and 1,500 units of Model B. And we decreased the Model A emphasis down to 10% and kept internal selling at 20%. And along with that, we maintained the prices to stay the same because we were selling quite well. With this, we ended up increasing our gross sales by more than $200,000. And with compensation, we were able to keep our employees happy and performing well, along with Henry no longer had a complaint from last quarter. And with recruitments, again, sadly, both of them declined our job offer. But for this quarter, the production and sales, we overestimated both Model A and B this time and ended up having to pay $15,000 in inventory charges. And even with this, we were still able to have a profit of $1,140,000 and ultimately do well. And if you could go on to quarter 8, that'd be great. Now, for quarter 8, the final quarter, we decided to keep everyone again in their current region and did not train anybody due to, well, we kept growing. And we ended up raising the commission from 3% to 3.75% this quarter in hopes of boosting sales to a greater extent. And we kept the sales competition the same at $6,000 for this quarter. And for recruitments, we tried to hire John Smith with a salary of $64,000, and we offered him Region 1, which was his hometown region. And it ended up working out because Sarah Barr was located in Region 1, who was underperforming so much. So that way, if we were able to hire him, we would be able to have the potential of being able to terminate her. And going on to production and sales, we stayed with what we ended up doing in quarter 7 by keeping 20% Model A emphasis, 20% internal selling, and kept the prices the same just as in quarter 7. For this, most everyone was able to do well and remained happy, although Henry did have a personal complaint due to unknown facts. For compensation, everyone seemed to be working well and sales still ended up increasing. Our costs remained low, yet the sales were still on the rise. For recruitment, John Smith, he did end up accepting our job offer. So with this, we ended up sending him to training. And in the following quarter, if there were to be a quarter 9, we were planning on terminating Sarah Barr because of her underperforming, where we would be able to play John Smith after he finishes his training into Region 1. For productions and sales, there were no overtime productions. Although we were still producing too much, and we had $32,000 worth of inventory charges this quarter, and Model A was overproduced by 71 units and Model B by 1,200 units. And so with this, we needed to learn to focus more on finding an accurate estimate on how much we need to produce each quarter. But still with this, we ended up having a $1,004,000 profit in this quarter.
Just a question on John Smith.
Yes.
How much over his expected was the 64,000?
I believe we did 8,000 again, like the previous quarter, just because he did have a lower rating, so we felt like he would be willing to accept it. But yeah, so we ended up doing 8,000 above his expected salary.
And if I can add, part of the reason why we played quarter 8 like we were continuing the simulation is because, and why we bought more Model B and everything, is because we were thinking long term, and we were thinking about how in this particular presentation we are, pitching an idea that we're continuing on with our sales. So it does look like we dropped a little in profit between Q7 and Q8, but we almost had to buy, if we were going on to quarter 9, we would have had a better performer in Region 1. We would have gotten rid of Sarah Barr, and we would have kept those Model B units into the next few quarters. So we decided to play the game like we were continuing.
Okay, good, which was a good decision.
All right, so if you could go on to salespeople analysis. So I struggled coming up with a way that I could compare independent and dependent variables that described and projected different ways that we were affecting our salespeople. So the best way I could come up with it was to create a table. So for salary, it's actually their ending salaries, so what they ended on. For home region, that was their original home region, and the region placed in is what they ended in. University, I just added that to try and compare university to the possible ratings for the future. If other people were in the same university and we knew those people were having high ratings, I could reference back. For retrained, I did binary codes. So 1 is yes and 2 is no, to see if retraining did affect our salespeople. And then I had total sales A, B, and total sales overall, referencing all Q1 through Q8 in a formula. So what's interesting about this sheet, Pat, if you want to go ahead and click on the 1.7778 repeating down below, sorry. So it'll pull up the person when you click on that had that low rating, and you can see that their sum of total sales was 435. And when you look at the total sales row J, you can see that that's kind of in the middle, not super high and not super low. And it's really interesting because as you go through those numbers and go down the line, you are able to compare these grand totals of sum of sales A, B, and total sales to the total sales column of J. And I found this really interesting because it really did show that once you get up above the 2.5 mark, that people had insanely more sales. So if you want to keep clicking down the row, at about 4.5 is where we really get to see a correlation between high ratings and higher sales. And it's also interesting.
Into a master's program or something?
I hope so. No, I hope it's still open. So it's also interesting because as you click down the ratings, it's going to tell you whether people in there were retrained or not. And for 4.5, 4.6, and 4.8, most of the people were actually not retrained, although it does say that there is one person in there that was retrained, and that was Henry, because Henry was our lower performing high scorer. Most of the people were 2s.
above 4.5, which made me believe that retraining is not as necessary when it comes to hiring people with higher ratings.
Wow.
This is really important information going on in the future for the, for the new venture we're looking into, because I'm going to focus, or we as a team are going to focus on people with that 4.5 and above rating scale. And as we saw throughout our decisions Q1 through Q8, we probably were not being competitive enough with the pay offered. So we would focus heavily on those 4.5ers and above, because they would cost us less in the long run to not have to retrain them.
I want to say this, that's an amazing analysis.
Thank you.
I've not seen anything like it.
Okay, so if you want to move to forecast A. It's so small. I don't know why it defaults to be so tiny, but okay, so for my forecast unit A, if you want to start on the other side of it, because that's the MAPE side. I have like a side over here.
Oh,
No, forecast A is fine. Yeah, over here. Okay, so as you could probably tell, we had some trouble with inventory management.
Not alone.
That was probably one of our biggest issues that we had. And so the reason why I actually spent a lot of time on this, and I did use your sheet as reference, so it should be all of the same things. The only thing that I did different was for the moving averages and exponential smoothing, I used the data analysis tab that they have in Excel to make sure that my formulas were 100% correct and I wasn't doing anything wrong. So that's an Excel add-in that anyone can add in. It's free. So this is your exact sheet, just set up a little bit differently.
Yeah. Nice.
So what was really interesting is that when I was referencing these different forecasts back to the sales unit B and the naive sales forecast, I thought, just eyeballing it, that the moving average, the 2-period moving average, was the closest. But when you go down and look at the graph, or even if you look at the MAPE, you can see that, so sales unit B is the blue line that sticks out the farthest to the left. Yeah, you can see that there are some lines that follow closely in its path. And if you go back up to the top, the way I figured out which one was the most accurate was by using the MAPE. So when you go over to MAPE, I'm sorry for making you go all over the place.
Well,
the other chart, like the second one.
Oh, the one to the right.
Yes. So it turns out that eyeballing your forecast is not enough. It actually takes using something like a MAPE to figure out. So MAPE is the mean average percent error, and the lowest error that you have when looking at the forecast is going to be the most accurate forecast. So it turns out that the MAPE decided that the exponential smoothing alphas of 0.6 and 0.8 were the closest forecast when it comes to being most accurate and on track with what we were actually selling. And when I went back and looked at those numbers at the beginning, it was like, oh, of course, that does look closer. But when you're just eyeballing it without doing the MAPE, it's a little bit harder than to figure out which forecast you think is most accurate. So I color coded it, with green being on the MAPE side being the most accurate or the lowest percent error. And then you can, if you look back on the other, I mean, you can see it, but when you look back here, I color coded it. So dark green was the most accurate forecast. Light green was the second most accurate forecast. Not on the graph, sorry, on the table. And
the table, yeah.
Yellow, well, I think it may have actually color coded with the thing too, but the yellow was also the one that I thought was the most accurate, but wasn't. So it's really interesting. And in the future, I would definitely use the exponential smoothing 0.8 and 0.6 to forecast inventory management to stop some of those errors that we made before. And I just put some like definitions in here in case you ever wanted to use a sheet like this. This is kind of just explains what it is and kind of helped me compartmentalize these different forecasts, because some of them were a little bit difficult to understand until I really researched it. So I typed this up. And it's not on the B sheet. If you don't want it, you can delete it.
Okay.
And then on forecast B, similar results, except it was very obvious on forecast B that exponential smoothing for 0.8 was the closest when it comes to being an accurate forecast. So alpha of 0.8, moving average for 2 period was the one that, again, I looked at and thought it was the best, but it turns out that the alpha 0.8 with the mean average error of 29% was the closest. And you can see this does forecast our unit Bs spiking like they did and then kind of leveling off. So that would be something we would take into account in the future when running the simulation for a few more quarters.
Okay.
All right, so if you want to go back to the PowerPoint. So what we learned, according to our data from this 2-year simulation, we learned that salary and sales are correlated. Commission is a driver for increasing productivity and sales. Placing people in their home regions is good for company reputation, but does not always matter when it comes to making sales. That's on my sales analysis chart. If you go through it, there were people that were in their hometown and still performed the worst. So I couldn't make an accurate hypotheses that those were connected. And then people with higher ratings are less likely to need retraining and have more sales on average. That was very obvious, and the correlation was very strong in my salesperson analysis. And then retraining does produce an increase in sales for some salespeople. So I would actually revise this to say most. Only one person it didn't really work on when I looked back at my salesperson analysis sheet. So I like those odds. I would continue retraining just because it is important, but you don't just have to retrain the people that are the lowest performers. I think retraining was successful in most of the people that we retrained. And then the next slide, strategies for future success. In the future, we plan on making these adjustments to our strategy. I'd like to start with a higher commission. I think we were a little stingy at the beginning, but we didn't know any better. Retrain more salespeople, not just the ones who are struggling. I think that the retraining for people that were not terrible with higher ratings like Henry actually did help. And then purchase more market research and continue to monitor our market share closely. We were trying to cut costs so much that we stopped purchasing market research. And because of that, I wasn't able to come up with like a comprehensive overview of us versus the competition, which I would have really done and probably put a lot of time into. But unfortunately, that was our own mistake trying to get the costs down. So I think in the future, we would purchase more of it. And then continue to focus on salespeople and meeting their salary and commission-based needs, making sure that there aren't a lot of complaints and keeping up with them. Okay. And compared to the competition. So I'm comparing us to Makos since they were the only person that beat us. The team that came in first place, this is information I got from Jessica, but also from some of the market research. They offered a higher commission from the beginning. They bought most market research every quarter. They retrained more often. They paid close attention to the growing regions and changed their salespeople placement more frequently. And they incurred costs more than us, but they came out on top because of it. And then there's the results, which we finished in second overall, second in our industry. Bummer.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pitch. So after a successful 2 years conquering the environmental market and creating a profit of over $1 million, we are asking for an initial investment of $5 million in exchange for a 20% stake in our company, Business as Usual Bicycles and Scooters. We would like to introduce to our market a company that not only sells bikes, but also the newest wave of easy transportation, electric scooters. We believe that with the higher margins that the electric scooters have and the foundation we have laid selling bikes, we could easily quadruple the profits we made in the first 2 years. We hope that our presentation has shown you that we understand how to manage sales for this type of business and can demonstrate that based on what we learned in the first 2 years of operation, the next 2 years of our bicycle/scooter business will have sustained growth. So what do you say, Sharks? Are you in?
I'm taking my credit card out now.